And we are live with our 185th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Wow, I can't talk today. Daniel. I'm joined today by Daniel Ting at hoodiepony on Twitter. Daniel, say hi.
Hi from Australia.
Of all places. As you can see, I am missing my regular co-host for the day. CK Tricky is out sick, but there's been so much going on, especially in Australia over the last week, that we wanted to bring Daniel on and talk about it because it has to do a lot with application security and the crocs and socks of AppSec. Before we dive into it with our fun little initial take, I did want to shout out to DeepSec. If you haven't heard, Ken and I will be at DeepSec in Austria in a couple of months in November. I know we've had some interest in our practical secure code review course in the EU. This is the opportunity. It's a public course and it is available. Please come join us if you can. Outside of that, I know like Daniel and I were saying before the podcast, we haven't seen anything for a while. Daniel was one of the organizers at some point of AppSec Day in Melbourne. Yes, and we haven't talked for quite a while because of global pandemics and life happening. So
what happened to 2021 and 2022?
I don't know. I don't know anymore, right? Like the fact that it is 2022 is surprising to me, right?
Wait,
for some reason,
it?
I see that. Yeah, yeah.
It's 2022.
No. It's still 2020. Don't worry about it. It's all good. It's all good.
Right. Okay. It's 2020 take two, right?
Take two. Yes, there you go. 2020 take two or three at this point. I don't know anymore. So tell us a little bit about. Well, okay. Maybe we should just jump straight into Optus and get that out of the way, and then we can catch up as we have time. So let's start with the. Do you want to share that video? We'll start there.
Okay, sure.
Sure.
Is it the spicy takes from
the spicy takes from Twitter about the breach?
Yeah. Let's see if that actually works. Share screen. Window. Let's see if it works.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see if we get any audio. If not, we can do a running commentary. Okay. Oh, I'm not hearing anything there. But yeah. Sorry, I'm still not. Nope. You're fine.
No audio.
Yeah, I'm not getting audio, which is not surprising the way that audio actually streams through here. But the interesting thing here is exactly what the news is calling out, right? The fact that they're saying Australia is 10 plus years behind, and maybe we should drop in the initial, or we should give a little bit of background first.
Yeah, I think
what happened. So Optus recently had a breach, right? So who is Optus? For those of us that are not in Australia, this is not a name that I necessarily recognize, coming from the States. Who is Optus, Daniel?
Yeah, okay. So Optus is Australia's second largest telco. Mm-hmm. It's practically Optus and Telstra.
Okay.
With the third far behind, Vodafone, mm-hmm. Being our third telco. Optus is huge. They are practically Singtel,
okay,
which is the Singaporean national carrier.
All right. Yes. Okay. So Optus owns. For the equivalent here is like AT&T or T-Mobile, like a large telecommunications provider that that runs and owns other businesses as well, right? So it's not just
no, not so
not so much.
Singtel is the parent company, which owns the Optus Australia business unit of sorts.
I
don't know. We'll look at the Optus press release for
Yes.
For the
who they
details.
are.
Yeah. I'm not their spokesperson. So the rough idea is that they are Australia's second largest telco.
Okay.
You practically have, for most Australians, you have practically two choices, three maybe. It's like Sprint.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
It's like the third choice is like Sprint. It's great in certain places, but very specific places only.
Yeah.
So Optus is the second largest in Australia, and that is very significant.
Yeah.
Because, and to make things more interesting, so this means that they have a lot of information, and
Yes.
their customer profiles kind of got breached.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is it, right? Anytime that there is a significant breach, the amount of customers that are affected obviously tie into how significant the breach is, what the criticality is. I did post up the link directly from Optus about, right, like their notification of customers on the cyber attack, but that's always the spin from the company as far as what's actually happened and what is going on underneath the hood. And I know you were sharing some of the Twitter links that were associated with the breach, or people that are digging into the actual detail behind the scenes. So I think it was the minister of, was that finance, or that was on one of the local channels talking about it?
For reference, ABC News is our national broadcaster.
Okay.
They try to keep as neutral as possible. So, yeah. She is our
Minister for Cybersecurity. Okay.
Minister of Home Affairs and Cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So, yeah. She basically just went out. So, just to quote the interviewer, the journalist basically goes, "Hey, so what we're hearing is that it's a sophisticated attack."
Mm-hmm.
Paraphrasing a bit, but then Clara's response is so quotable. "Oh no, it's not.
No, it's not." Yes. Yes. And that was the interesting thing here, right? Is that it's not a sophisticated attack. So what was the actual attack?
So IDOR, insecure direct object reference,
Yep.
on a public API endpoint that is just sitting there on the internet with no off.
Yeah.
Is basically what so the journalist who was following all this up, Jeremy Kirk, basically got in contact with the people who were selling the data.
Oh,
and
wow. Yeah.
And he was like, what I've heard from my sources that it's a public endpoint. Which is it? This endpoint? Which endpoint did you touch? Did you access? And it was like, yep, basically that. So
and I mean, as surprising as that is, well, okay, as surprising as that sounds, if you're not doing penetration testing or you're not in the space, publicly available endpoints with IDOR is one of those. Yes, but not overly shocking if you're testing any of these systems, right? Mobile applications specifically, or React, web applications that are interacting with APIs have a tendency to pull back data based on a specific reference counter, right? So I log into an application, I authenticate, I get back a user ID, and then I look up data via the API using that user ID. Now, if the user ID is something like, a 10-digit number, it's very easy to change, digit 9 to digit 0 and actually see if there's other content, or a 1 to a 2, and view somebody else's information, right? And I believe that's exactly what happened here. I mean, this feels very similar to the AT&T breach back when iPhones were first launched here in the States, where somebody noticed that during enrollment process, there was an endpoint at AT&T that had a customer ID in it, and all they had to do was change a 1 to a 2, and then they could pull information back. But it does feel like this was taken further because the data was being sold and being, peddled somewhere else for, right, for nefarious use or malicious use. Correct?
I mean, we can speculate.
We can speculate wildly. That's what we're here for, is the speculation.
I mean, like, reading the original post. So my understanding is that the breach forum, which it was posted to, the original post, is now gone. So all we have left is screenshots from the various tweets that journalists have gone and looked around. From the original tweet, I guess opportunistic. Hello?
Hey, sorry, I'm just a little bit. I can hear you now. Daniel, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Is it my internet?
It might be mine. I have a, Comcast likes to mess with me.
Okay.
All right. All good. It's settled now. Whatever happened. Can you hear me still?
I'm not an Optus.
You are being, we're being DOSed because you're talking about it. Sorry.
I think we something's frozen again. Hello. Welcome back.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm still here.
I think your network is stinky.
It might. Yeah, it is. It does not want to let me out. All right. Sorry about that, Daniel.
Oh, good. Alrighty. I guess where were we before all our network troubles? I mean, when most cyber criminals or attackers see something like that, it's when you basically can take the data that is, and based on the data that we see that has been exposed, it's basically the same amount of data that you need to take out a loan, open a PayPal account, apply for various things. Inherently, we have seen how much those data goes for. If you want to talk about fools go for a very known value.
Yes.
This is as good as it gets within Australia. Then you have passport numbers. What else did their press release call out? So we have our equivalent. We have our healthcare numbers. In Australia, we call it the Medicare card. There are some healthcare IDs in there, according to later reports. So everything you need to impersonate anyone is basically in the data dump. That goes for a lot. And anyone who's opportunistic, well, what would you do?
Yeah. Right? Yep. Well, and it seems like that they've taken it, and instead of trying to actually run those attacks themselves, they've just collected the data and they're offering it for sale on the deep web or on the dark web somewhere.
I mean, I think that was a very interesting move. If you take a look at the original post for the data, they did ransom it back to Optus first. which it was a very interesting move, I think.
Yeah.
And it was way below what they would have been fined by our privacy commissioner. So it gives me a feel that this may be slightly more sophisticated than what it feels to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the number, and I've seen some, this is not my own commentary, I've seen some other pundits and commentaries around the InfoSec sphere here that basically analysis shows that this person nailed the pricing
Yeah.
on the data. And it seems very targeted to Optus.
Okay.
Because at, I believe it was selling $1 million for $1 million. The fine would have come out a couple of millions. So this person set it just low enough
to make it
below
attractive. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
And
It's a, yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. No. You're fine. I mean, I think the analysis there is the those criminals on the deep web or whoever it is that's, selling breach data has started to do more analysis of the companies after they get access. So if they're going after a small, law firm somewhere, they're gonna limit the amount to basically what it's going to cost them to restore or actually get back into it, in order to make it more attractive to just pay that instead of moving away or contacting the authorities, what have you. So I mean, in that case, right? Do you think that Optus actually paid that amount and they still kept dropping that, or was it they just ignored them?
Well, I'd like to quote somebody quote Risky Business podcast and
Yeah.
and basically say, well, Australia released the hounds. It is no secret that our intelligence agencies, our law enforcement agencies, the Australian Federal Police, the equivalent in the US would be the FBI, our Signals Directorate, which equivalent of the NSA, is hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they have, if I were the seller, well, there's a bit of heat. You don't really want to move the wares when the hounds are hunting you.
Yes.
So they did, so they did in the end just put out a message that to the effect of there are just too many eyes, did a apology of some sort, but I mean it's still pretty massive data breach. I have no illusions that this data has been accessed by more than this person. Pretty sure. And given that I've heard from more than a few sources that this API endpoint has been kind of open for more than a while.
Yeah. Well, and and that's the other question is how long has that data been accessible, right? That's always one of the things that we kind of go back to. Who's it been accessed by? I mean, like I start to think about it from a blue team perspective and a forensic perspective. All right, if I'm sitting on the team or you're sitting on the team that is responsible for this API endpoint, how do you figure out what the blast radius is? Like how many people are affected, how much data has been leaked out? Because it would be pretty obvious somebody running through hundreds of thousands of records and trying to retrieve it all from even like multiple endpoints, just because most interactions with this sort of a database are going to be a single request response, right? I'm going to ask for my customer ID. I'm not going to ask for 500 customer IDs.
Yeah. Reading, I'm not 100% sure. There's just way too much that has happened and a lot of information. But I think I read somewhere on the Twitterverse that basically what happened here is they tripped a API rate limiting trigger. That's how they got found out.
Yeah.
What that is, how that's configured,
we don't know. Yeah.
We don't know. Based on some initial hand waviness, voices in the wind through the grapevine, they would have had API controls in place. It's just, what was that limit? And I guess even from a detection and response perspective, yeah, they may be able to go back and look at the logs, but first and foremost, why is there an unauthed API with PII directly on the internet?
Yeah.
And fundamentally, where has that risk assessment come in? And like, we look at the OAuth's top 10, IDOR is kind of on there.
Yes.
Right. He's been there for a while now. Securing public endpoints and making sure that your endpoint is offed is also a very well-known security control. So
yeah,
at this point they left. I think I made this comment to somebody who was asking. I was like, hey, like, is this sophisticated? I'm like, yeah, it's like, having a store on Main Street with really shiny goods in there, leaving the doors open, walking away with nothing, with no security, like just leaving the doors open and walking away. And when somebody comes in and helps themselves to the goods, you cry foul that you have been attacked by insert nation state here.
Yeah. This is not an APT, right? And that's exactly what the minister said, right? This was not a sophisticated attack. This is what we, like we lovingly refer to as the Crocs and socks of application security, right? Like, it's number one in the OWASP top 10. Insecure direct object reference has been around for years. We see it.
Broken access control.
Yep. The APIs that you're designing, anyone's designing, is going to discover this. And I did tell you, prior to us going live, I've been dealing as well with, helping customers with bug bounty reports recently, and it's no huge. Oh, okay. So this company as well, very well known company in the States, has APIs that their mobile and web application use to look up customer data, to do different things, to interact with their platform, store documents, store images, what have you. But very similar attacks have been going on, and very similar reports. I shouldn't say attacks. Very similar reports have been coming in for their bug bounty program, because of the way that it was designed, that any customer can look up any data in the API with, using a single, string of digits. And sometimes it's a little hard to discover what somebody else's like customer ID is. It wasn't as enumerable as this one. But once you have that customer ID, the ability to get access to their data, change their data, take over accounts, is all predicated on the fact that you've already authenticated once, right? You logged into the system, but there's no other authorization controls on top of that. And so it doesn't necessarily, I don't know, like, I'm not super shocked by the vulnerability in and of itself. I am shocked by kind of the brazen attitude that it's out on the internet, that it took so long to protect, right? That's where I go to.
I think there's two things, right? First is the just pure access control that is unauthed. So IDOR aside, insecure direct object reference aside, this is unauthed on the internet. So in and of itself, that is questionable.
Yep.
And I think that's one control, the parameter control, right? Then if we are talking about IDOR, but it's oft, there is a token of some sort, or you need the user to be authenticated, and then you enumerate that way, right?
Yeah.
That's a problem, but that's a different kind of problem from a potentially now critical risk to maybe a medium high or high risk situation.
Yep.
Right. So yeah, just trying to pull that apart and say, well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, like it's definitely something that should have been detected earlier. There's multiple programs that are in place, or multiple, multiple activities that would have identified this. And I mean, even if we go back to just a simple, like you were saying, a threat model of, okay, this is an API that exists, right? What is it that we should we do to protect it? And I don't know, right? Like, we can't dig too much into the organizational dynamics that run into this and why it's been protected or why it hasn't been. Just because we're not sitting there, and I don't want to pile on, because I'm sure they have security people that are internal that are throwing their hands up in the air and have been running around screaming about things previously, because most organizations do. So for some reason, this API was just either missed or it was outside of the scope. I know I've run into that in the past. Speaking of this other customer, right? Like doing assessments for them and being told that the API was off limits, right? Because it was the golden goose, right? Like, it's being used by all these different resources, and for some reason that made it off limits, as opposed to, hey, let's really dig into it. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it feels pretty discoverable and easy to see, especially after the fact, right? That's a typical breach. But man, yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, like, not to pile on too much as well. It's like APIs can sometimes be really difficult to discover.
Yeah.
Especially if they get really complex and this is piping from 24 different messaging systems. Like, well, where does this? But that said, um, the this was a pretty, like, it's their main API.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
if we look at other trades, like say this one, Seth, if you can just
Yeah.
and if you look at the details out there, api.optus.com.au.
Yeah.
That sounds very much to me like their primary API endpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been targeted, right? Like a bug bounty, like whoever's gonna take a look at that. So at some point, there's a lack of oversight that's happening, or decisioning that's being made without taking into account the risks that are associated with it. Um, I mean, I know the PII details that you're talking about there as well, right? Like, it's insecure direct object reference, but they're also returning um, significant levels of PII that probably shouldn't be returned to any customer, no matter what their situation is. If they need to know something, like, so in the States, like the social security number, right? Guess what? You don't tell them that social security number ever, right? It doesn't matter if they're calling an API, or you may give them a couple of digits so they can recognize whether or not it's their social security number, but you don't actually return the full plain text of a lot of that info. And I think that's the other thing, right? Like, this is a combination of authentication, authorization, sensitive data exposure, right? Like, it's just this um, almost comedy of errors that's happening, all in this one exploitation path. And of course, somebody's going to take it and run with it if they discover it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the question is all this, like, looking at the data, for those in the Slack, you would have seen a small snippet of what that looks like. Why is that data in a public, in a customer or a publicly retrievable endpoint even?
Yep.
um that's first, is why is it retained?
Yeah.
That's very concerning, right? And speaking about legislation, what about GDPR?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure there are a few EU citizens in that list.
Oof, yeah. Well, and that's going to be the question, right? Like, what are the penalties that come out of this? I know we were talking about, already there's discussions of class action lawsuits against Optus for it. But once the data is out there, it's out there, right? And like, there's no getting that back. If you look at some of those previous breaches from, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, like whatever, and from the States, right? That's just it. It's on the deep web. Somebody has a copy of it. It's going to get resold, sold, resold, resold. And the people that it damages are those whose data is in that set that are never going to be, right? Like 2 years of, credit monitoring just
2 years of credit monitoring can't change my birthday.
No, or your driver's license number, or right, any of those details that you need to take out a loan. It's just,
it's there.
Yeah.
And if I think just flipping the whole conversation around, if as security professionals, I think we need to think of better ways to do identity verification beyond proof of documentation or proof of this. Because fundamentally, if all this data is going to get collected and breached, and like fingerprints and all of that, like you can't change that once that's breached.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, we've always had this concept of it's a matter of when, not if, right? When it comes to data that we have, so we protect things like passwords. Like, we put so much time and effort into hashing passwords, doing it in a secure manner. And then something like this happens and it's all plain text, and right, this has a larger effect than those password breaches, right? It just will, over time. And I think you're right. Like, we don't think enough about identity and what the real risk of this data getting out is. Because yes, it'll affect stock price for Optus. I'm sure there's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be financial penalties, especially with GDPR and some of those other regulations that are out there. But again, it's not necessarily Optus that has to live with this in 10 years.
And put it this way, for companies, if companies fail, Nobody, like, it's like a pin dropping in the forest. Fine, cool. You may miss the service, whatever. Cool. Another one will come up if the product is necessary, right? If not, it's just the evolution of commerce.
Yes.
But if as an individual, my life is now impacted, the lives of people I care are impacted, the lives of our troops are impacted.
Yeah.
Because now people who need to, who keep their privacy for various reasons, including, not wanting other people to take out loans in their names or open up credit lines or phone numbers, etc. in their name.
Yeah.
Can't change any of that. Government documents aside, because the government can always just come in and go like, yep, as a once-off, we'll change those documents, whatever. Right? Like, Victoria just actually did that. Like, as a once-off, we'll bill Optus for all the driver's license changes that you need.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, honestly, that's a better response than we've seen in the States on breaches of this magnitude, right? Like, I've never heard a discussion here on, especially like when the Fannie Mae breach happened, of trying to do any sort of social security number update or identity updates to account for breaches. And so, like, at the very least, there's some forethought there as far as, all right, this is a one-off and we're just going to charge Optus for it. But Yeah, I mean, at least there is some sort of a response. Here in the States, everybody's like, YOLO, you only live once, right? You'll be fine. Just monitor your credit for the next 50 years, right? That's been the, no one cares.
And that's like a personal impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you say monitor your credit, I saw a comment on Twitter. I'm not going to take credit for this because it was brilliant. I think the tweet went like, so we are one company who has breached, who has lost our data, is now giving our data to a company which has known to have lost data to monitor the data which they lost.
Yes.
um like is there a bigger conversation then about credit agencies
Mm-hmm.
holding just everyone just holding way too much data? I mean, moving aside from that, it's also the consideration where, how do we then do identity with data minimization? If
Mm-hmm.
more data is not the answer from a systems perspective, from a AppSec perspective, what can we do? Because like you need to still identify the individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do we then, I don't know the answer, right? But how do we then identify the individual without having to keep a buckload of data?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a the it's a problem without a great solution right now. I mean, we have identity providers, but they are all built on the premise that they need more data in order to identify more people, right? Like, there's a reason that companies go to, you know, credit providers, or or the credit monitoring systems, right? Because they already know about everyone. Um, yeah, and I don't know how you get around that, right? Because at some point you have to have a trusted entity tell you whether or not that person is indeed who they say they are. So you've got to have some sort of identity solution in place. But whether or not that's actually secure, at this point, we've proven over and over again that we cannot secure that data.
So can we take zero trust? Okay,
Yeah,
bring a
yeah,
shot.
yeah, yeah. Take a shot. Zero trust.
Like, I mean, we are talking a lot about, how do we then, assume breach,
Mhm.
right? How do we then design an identity solution that is in an assume breach environment? I think
Yeah.
it's a bit more of a conversation that needs to be had.
It is, right, but it is like, breaches like this are just going to push it to the forefront. I don't think there's a solution out there that that takes into account identity for zero trust environments or identity, right? Like, because at some point, like, it's implicit in those environments that, yes, there's zero trust until we've identified and authorized someone, and then they're able to flow and get to the services, the systems that they need to.
And I mean,
Yeah.
to bring that back to say the US side of things, right? The Office of Personnel Management.
Yeah. Yeah. OPM breach. Yeah. People are still dealing with that, right?
How many people had to, relocate or witness protection just because they are involved with things that is definitely, there are
Yeah.
adversaries. um there are people who would like to get access to these people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's physical consequences to these breaches, right? Like, I think some of the initial ones 15 years ago when the breaches happened, it was always like this. I think back to like the Target breach, everybody kind of like shrugged. I think Target had a small dip in their, in their stock price, but everybody moved on pretty quickly. But these ones that have happened more recently, where it is verification data, it's authentication, identity data, the consequences are becoming more and more apparent in the real world. It's not just, hey, somebody stole my credit card. At this point, it's identity theft. But to your point on the zero trust, right? Like, I posted a link from the Wikipedia article on zero trust, right? The main concept behind the zero trust security model is never trust, always verify. That's great, but what happens when your verification is broken and you can't trust your verification, right? That's the exact problem that we're running into here. Is I can take these, what is it, like 10 million records from this breach, and I could create a verification system based upon this, and then start to manipulate it.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
like, for example, the international COVID certificates. Sorry, the COVID vaccination certificates.
Yeah.
That assumes the data is public. But it also allows you to verify that this is actually representing the person, etc., etc. So I think there are some more modern thinking around that, based on certificates and all of that. So I don't see it as a lost cause. It's just, I guess, for better or worse, a cry for help to the community, and go like, hey, as people in this space, we need to have those conversations, because when the leaders start looking at us and go like, hey, you're the security person. How do we solve this? What are your thoughts? What are considerations? Then we need to, be able to have that at least taught.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the public-private, the certificate-based authentication could help on this, especially if those certificate authorities or whoever it is that's issuing those, again, is someone that you trust. If it's coming from the government, if it's coming from other places, there's ability to actually, revoke certificates, upgrade certificates. I think that's a lot of what we run into. Is we've got all of these systems in place that depend on static pieces of information for identity, rather than something that is dynamic, something that can change over time, that we can revoke and reissue in order to take into account breaches, right? Assumption of compromise. And when that compromise happens, if all we have to do is, we reissue a new certificate, we send you out a new, I mean, even if it is an RFID chip or whatever it happens to be, we can send that out. There's a cost associated with it, but at the very least, there is an upgrade path.
And I think the other thing is that we need to normalize that we don't actually need to know who you are. We just need to trust your identity. So concepts like proxy certs,
yes,
right, can definitely be used from a technical solution perspective, where you never expose the real identity, but you use a proxy certificate or signed identity, etc., to assert trust.
Yes.
In the same sense.
Yeah.
So if hypothetically, a certain provider gets compromised, all you see is a whole bunch of proxies.
Yeah. Yep. Proxy data, things that are not. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, problem to solve, and I wonder how we actually get to that next step. But it is something that, if you're listening to the podcast, you should be thinking about, right? Like, if we assume compromise at every step of the way, like every part of our security onion, right? Like whatever you want to call it, every layer of security, then we're going to do things in a slightly different manner in order to secure that data and in order to verify that trust, because we're not going to assume that our data is always pristine, right? Behind the scenes, or whoever we're calling, right? Like when they do get breached, how do we, upgrade quickly? How do we make those changes? It's just another piece in that security puzzle that you probably need to put into place.
And especially if you're, a security person involved with your organization's security controls, and you have a call center, right?
Yeah.
Changing the script, the way, the mechanisms of, can we have a challenge response? mechanism rather than going, hey, so can you tell me the last 4 digits of your credit card number?
Yeah. Yep.
It's
Yes.
like, what's your surname and your mother's maiden name?
Mhm. Yeah. It's all of those yeah, all of those mechanisms that we use to prove identity that I mean, I start to think about, you went straight to like the physical, like, dial up, which is, again, an identity solution that we don't always think about as like developers or even application security people, right? Like we have a tendency to jump straight to username, password fields, and maybe 2FA. And then, we push a little bit into, forgot password, like the other technical mechanisms that we have in an application to prove somebody's identity. But there's so much more that's out there in the physical world that we have to worry about from a security perspective that has a direct impact on those technical controls that we put into place for a website, for a mobile application, whatever it is that we're developing. So,
Yeah.
I don't think there's I mean, obviously we're not going to solve it on the podcast today, but it's quite a bit to
It's
think
an
about.
interesting solutioning kind of like thought experiment, right? But I think just, changing gears a bit, like there is going to be flaws, right? As we can
Mhm.
see, there's a lot of holes in the whole Swiss cheese security
Yes.
model. Um, the thing that baffled a lot of people and with this Optus breach is that there was no way to communicate with Optus.
Yeah.
I've heard from more than a few people, and if you go on Twitter and just look around, you see as much that people for a while have been trying to notify Optus of the issue. And like in one of the links that was shared earlier, you could see somebody automating access of the Optus data using an unauthenticated public API.
Hmm.
And that I guess that's the scary bit. It has uh, the ability to change stuff as well.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I've not taken any closer look at it than skimmed the tweets just before the podcast started. But
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great look, right? Because I'm not even, I don't know, like if I just Google things for like Optus bug bounty program, right? I see some open bug bounty reports for Optus. I wonder if those have all come out recently with the focus here. But I'm also seeing, right, like the third or fourth response is managed cybersecurity service solutions from Optus Enterprise, right? And so I'm like, okay, yeah, yeah.
sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say they're not dog fooding their own solution, right? You know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, you want to know what's even more amusing? There is like Optus owns Trustwave.
Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 Yeah. Oh yeah. Well-known security, right? Oh, is this like?
Well-known security firm.
Yes. A very well-known security firm that I know finds this sort of problem for other locations, right? Um, yeah.
And we are seeing basic things like there is no security.txt
Mm-hmm.
files. So even if any good Samaritan comes by and goes like, hey, by the way, you have a problem here, how do you responsibly disclose any of this? Because
Yeah.
people make mistakes, and there are a lot of good Samaritans, and a lot of us in AppSec, we'll see, oh, yeah, that's not right, that ain't right, let's let somebody know. How do you can't even do that? And I've heard stories of people trying to reach out to Optus and disclose this, and they go like, no, we have good security. Like, we are a security provider as well. Have you heard of Trustwave?
Yeah. they send you to Trustwave when somebody reports a security problem. Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Like I said, it feels a lot like a comedy of errors, right? Somebody and probably like miscommunications between teams. I'm sure there's hundreds of people involved across multiple organizations, and right, like this is one of those, like, it slipped through the cracks, but it's a pretty big slip through the cracks, right? It's not a, oh, there was 200 user identities breached. We're talking 10 million. That's massive.
Yeah, and even if I think that's where that becomes even worse, because there is no way to report it.
Yeah.
Even if like, things will slip through the cracks, that's just normal, right? Because people miss things. People are people. People make mistakes. But if there is no way to do responsible disclosure, well, the only way to disclose is to potentially wait for a threat actor, an adversary, or someone nefarious to take advantage of that, and then you get notified in the news.
Yep. Which I mean, it feels like the way that we did things 20 years ago, right? Before we had security teams and security professionals and application security and threat actual discussions about threats. And so, like, disclose.io, yes.
So shout out to disclose.io. I mean, like, simple steps, right? Like, go get a disclose.io responsible disclosure template, generate the thing, drop it there, pop a security contact. The minimal.
Yeah.
That goes to an actual real person, not level 1 customer support, which does not understand security, so that it can be validated.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this also goes, right? Like, I know, we've been going for a little while talking about Optus, but the other big one that was in the news recently, like, has been the Uber hack that happened, which was more of a social engineering engagement, or a social engineering hack that then led to discovering some bad practices and plain text passwords in order to take over accounts. Let me see. I'll post up there quickly, like, here's Uber's update, and then like one of the analysis on it as well. But it does feel like there's been quite a bit of activity around different breaches in the news recently. And I know some of our initial podcasts, like, we got into kind of breach fatigue, which is, again, what I fear is going to happen, right? The fact that from a community perspective in the States, the Optus hack, like, really hasn't been covered that well. I'll be honest, right? It's just not, like, I know it's been in the news and we've been seeing quite a bit of it on the Slack channel, just because we have people that are interested in that space. But if I look around the rest of my space here in the States, we just haven't seen a lot associated with Optus being even discussed, which is surprising to me.
So. If memory serves me right, I believe the US is working on mandatory breach disclosure laws. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that's in effect yet, but in Australia, we have mandatory breach disclosure laws. Hence why it's a bit more of a story thing. But that's the thing. When the mandatory breach disclosure laws first came into effect, what we saw was breach fatigue was definitely real.
Yeah.
Because everyone not wanting to fall foul of the laws basically just disclosed everything. It was actually real, like, breach disclosure laws were so sensitive that if, let's just say, I was authorized to see the data, but Seth, you aren't, but we both work for the same company, it just so happened we are on slightly different teams, that's a that seeing that data may cause harm,
then
that's a breach, and you need to disclose that.
Uh-huh.
So we had a lot of a lot of breaches that got disclosed to the OAIC, which is our Information Privacy Commissioner, and that basically caused a whole bunch of fatigue, and everyone's like, okay, so now what? Like, cool, you told me my data, and it's well meaning, it means well so that people are empowered, because the first thing you can do is to know that your data has been breached before you can take any action. But the next step is, so now what?
Yeah.
And the number of times I've been, like, friends who know that I work in do this, and it's like, hey, my identity has just been stolen.
What do I
Help.
do? Yeah. What do I do? Yeah. Because
It,
the letters from the organization are incredibly, vague, and, oh, here, go sign up for credit monitoring, and then, yeah, like that's kind of the hand waving that goes on, as far as like how do you protect yourself is very difficult, especially as a non-technical person, right? It's one thing to be able to know how to freeze your credit, unfreeze, like go in and actually run through some of those activities. But as a non-technical person, I think like previous generations that didn't grow up with this much, I don't even want to say control, or just this much access to technology, uh, it's an overwhelming, um, yeah, it's an overwhelming thing to confront, right? Uh, you know, and then they start getting calls from Microsoft that their computer is hacked, right? That's probably the next step, is they start to get calls from scammers on top of this, and they know about them, and money's going to get lost. So, well, I mean, what do you recommend then? Like, what do you tell those people that come to you, Daniel? Like, what do you tell them to do?
unfortunately, very little. Besides filing your police report, and if they can, right?
Yeah.
I've had conversations where they have had money taken away from them. Good thing that there is ways to reverse it in the traditional banking system, and they have not converted it into Monero. Uh,
Yeah. Not yet. Not yet, anyway.
Not
Yeah.
yet, but but yeah, the only thing you could really do is file a police report and get your identity documents changed if you can. uh Talk to your bank, say that you are like, and that's the even more frustrating thing, right? Even if you were tech savvy, like, have you had to navigate your bank telling
Hmm.
them your identity got stolen?
Yeah.
Like, threat model that for a moment, right? If
Yeah.
you lose who you are and you can't prove who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you actually change any of that? How do you?
So
Yeah.
hypothetically, somebody, like, very quickly threat model this: if somebody got hold of your email account and your primary phone number that you bank with,
Yeah.
now how do you how do you come out from that? Even if you had your photo ID or
Yeah.
your social security number, right? You had that social security card, you go like, hey, this is who I am.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah. I mean, going into a branch to physically change some of that, I don't know if you could actually get the bank to do that in a fast enough that, or quickly enough to prevent ongoing breach, right? Ongoing breach of the same account, or especially before someone's drained that money and taken it away. It's a it's a daunting problem, and we don't have good solutions for that, right? Like, we don't have banks of people waiting it, or like, yeah, a help desk that is specifically targeted to breaches or identity theft. You're calling the same number as everyone else that is dealing with, hey, I just want to transfer money between two accounts, or I forgot my password, right? Like, that's the same level of support that you're going to get. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good solution for any of this, right? And I know it's a little, nihilistic, like, oh well, right? Like, but there isn't a lot of good recommendations that you can give people on
yeah, I
where to
mean,
turn.
um that one guy in Slack, I was like, yep, there is already a lot of blockbusters about it, but yeah, blockbusters are one thing. Having to actually deal with it, it's worse.
Yeah.
um And I mean, a lot of us do end up, especially the consultants who watch this. I know a few consultants who watch this.
Yeah.
When you're in that place providing advice, maybe have that second order effects and have those conversations with your stakeholders and go like, hey, what about, like, we are looking at AppSec. How does our application, how does our system actually afford material impact like this? And I guess,
well, and then it goes back to, right, like, all right, you come up with a solution. So I'm looking specifically at the Uber hack, right? There was a spear phishing attempt against, like, he went and found credentials, like whoever that Lapsus hacker was, right? And it's coming out that was somebody in the UK, and just a young kid. But basically, they got breach data, credential data for a specific Uber engineer, attempted to log in as them, and it required MFA or 2FA, a token, to be approved. And so it would pop up on this security engineer's or whoever's phone, hey, is this you? And he clicked no over and over and over again, and eventually got so sick of clicking no because the attacker was trying again and again that he clicked yes, right? So he had like notification fatigue. And once he said yes, then there was other things that happened, and he was able to get in and see some, pages that had plain text credentials. And so there was other things that happened after the fact, but the initial, security controls that existed failed because of the way that they notified and what happened with that security engineer. And I can't say that other people in an organization wouldn't have also clicked yes in that situation, right? They would think that MFA was misfiring. Something's, some system's gone wrong. I'm trying to log in or whatever. And, I'm just going to click yes. And then you go on with your day and you don't realize you were breached. So,
and a lot of this is very hard to think about and qualify and even think, like, even dream up the scenario, because there's a lack of imagination. Unfortunately, we as a society have started to condition everyone that thinking like an attacker or finding unintended uses for things as criminal. Hacking is not a crime. And I think we just need to, as a community, start shifting that conversation a bit more, that no, we need to normalize that hacking is not a crime. Doing crime is a crime. Performing an attack like that is a crime. And being able to say, hey, we found a weakness, we found an unintended behavior that we have, managed to use, like opening, a can of paint using a screwdriver. That's unintended use of a tool. But, having that in mind and actually just reacting the right way is that, oh, okay, didn't think of that. Is this going to be a problem for us? If it is, then, like, okay, cool. Now we have a new scenario or consideration to make. And I think that's where, like, having that conversation, that normalizing thinking about unintended behavior. I had a actually very amusing conversation this evening and go, like, with somebody who, when I mentioned, well, there are people who would like to try unexpected things with the API endpoints, and access data because it's there. And this person's mind would just explode. Like, they couldn't fathom that somebody would not use it for its intended purpose. And that was like almost a religious moment. I was like, oh no, this is sinful, kind of. And it just, I guess, reminded me that I think there is also that cultural normalization, not just the technical. So we did talk about the technical bits, we did talk about the internal and external controls bits, but also I think culturally.
Well, and I mean, it goes back to the Crocs and socks, but it's also, you're right. We are culturally, like, groomed to, okay, you follow the rules, you only use this in this one way, right? Like that's, to function as a society, that's what people have to do. And so we don't always think about the edge cases. And I mean, I think you and and I'd argue Ken and a lot of people that listen to the podcast, we do live in that headspace of, like what happens when we use this in an insecure manner, or when we like change this ID parameter or whatever else it is. Are those controls in place? Because we have to think about it. But a lot of the culture isn't, right? Like you talk to developers, I talk to developers all the time that, these are unintended consequences, because they only imagine this like, okay, this is the one functional way that I use this application and I use this endpoint. No one else would ever use it in a different way, because that would be hacking and illegal. And right, you're like,
Taboo.
taboo. Yeah, it's more taboo than illegal. It's just like,
Yep.
you don't do that, which leaves these holes wide open for those that would actually try it.
And it becomes super liberating, like bringing back to AppSec, when in conversations with developers, going like the light bulb moment, right, where they go like, wait, oh my god, I could do this. Like I can think of ways to completely destroy this and do things like, oh, this app that I just wrote can definitely kill somebody. Go like, yeah, I'd like to know about how. Let's have a conversation if we can put some controls around that, please.
Yeah.
And just the liberty of like, wait, I can think about the bad things as well.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that kind of goes back to not only like the technical testing that we do, right? But to your point about threat modeling and thinking about the risks up front of, when something goes wrong. And I know there's other industries and other culture, like you look at something like mining or heavy equipment or construction, and even, like civil engineering, they have to think about all of the edge cases, or people die, right? Like that is what happens. And so they've gotten really good at building out checklists and thinking about threats, right? Physical threats. And we haven't grown up as much in the software space, in the online space, the virtual space, to take those same things into account. I think we're getting there, but we're still very culturally expected to only follow the one path.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see technology evolve and that maturity, because with something like civil engineering, so I recently did an engagement with a civil engineering firm. Timelines are 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are talking about AppSec projects, 2 week sprints.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
2 week sprints, which needed to be done last week.
Yeah.
With 6 weeks epic, and we're shipping.
Yeah.
We're shipping the alpha to prod.
Yeah.
Because
we're agile. Yeah, we're agile. Yep.
So and there is that certain level of mystique that comes with things that we can do with tech, right? You see that multiplier, the 10x multiplier in terms of like social network effects and all this technology effects. But are we moving too fast, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a fine line, right? Like we're going to have to walk a fine line, because we do want that technology to take effect. We don't want to wait 5 years for a new app to come out, because technology will have changed, right? Yeah. And yeah, I don't know how we I don't necessarily think we don't have to solve it all today, but it's all an interesting like thought exercise, to come up with the scenarios and with the problems that we currently see. So,
I mean, we are doing like code reviews and conversations on DevSecOps and improving flows, and the more I see it, the more I learn from manufacturing, from health sciences, from civil engineering.
Yeah.
There are so many things that other professions have solved that is just mind-blowing, I guess. It's a way to phrase it, of how much we can learn from all this past. And it's just kind of like a bit exciting, if there's a way to take the lessons that they have learned and go,
Yep.
maybe if we start thinking of technology in those concepts.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and we've always said that like the space needs to get bigger, right? We need experience from people that aren't traditional like software developers, or right, like if we get people coming in from the civil engineering side or from the law side or whatever, whatever their background is, they're going to bring us all up, because they'll bring some of those experiences with them. They'll bring that knowledge of, oh, well, we solved these problems in this manner in this other industry, like healthcare, right? Like you think about like the checklist, the idea of, oh, I want to make sure that I do the same thing every single time and do it in a safe manner. I'm going to create a checklist because people are bad at actually remembering what they need to do, right? It's a very simple thing and a very simple concept to take into play here, but it fits very easily into what we do on a daily basis.
And as much as we want the best checklist works. That's why we have pre-flight checklists, we have safety checklists.
Yep.
But
they
also,
do. Yeah.
And just to echo that, like besides Melbourne, there was a speaker who transitioned in from being a nurse into cybersecurity. And this person was a bit baffled as to why we don't have something like a residency system.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wait, you're expecting me to learn all of this while delivering full-time equivalent? But who's training me? Who's showing me how to do it? Who's letting me observe?
Yeah.
YouTube being done.
Yeah.
Within the context that we can actually have a meaningful conversation. It's like in being a nurse. Shout out to whoever that speaker was. Sorry, forgot your name. But being a nurse, you have that residency. Being a doctor, you do that 1-year residency to pick up.
Yeah.
Is it time?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it is, right? Like, it's just like this space has exploded, and no one, like, I know from my perspective, if, you're trying to walk this fine line, running a small like consulting shop, right? Having people billable so we can pay the bills in order to, to pay more people. It's like this slow growth in order of, okay, we want to train up on a new technology or train someone up who is junior. That means that we take away from billable time, not only for the junior person, but from like a senior person to help them get to that point. Even though it's going to be worth it in the long run, it's very difficult to justify those costs. But then it also partially feeds into the fact that everyone thinks that a penetration test should be done in 2 days and should cost them, $1,000, right? Like, it's just like this unrealistic expectations. But it goes back to that security too, right? Like, hey, in civil engineering, it's going to be secure. That bridge is going to hold people up, but we're spending 6 months designing that bridge and thinking about everything, all the security implications and physical features that need to exist in order to make sure that it is secure. We just don't do the same thing on the software space. So it's like expectations and managing expectations versus reality and like implementing all those things.
And maybe at the risk of it sounding political,
yeah,
maybe this, cybersecurity needs to evolve the way healthcare has, where, it's not just purely on the private sector or to fund it, however you feel about that, whether it's insurance, whether it's private sector or a mix of both, whatever system it is, maybe that needs to change a bit. Because like, as much as it's unreasonable to say $1,000 2-day pen test of this new mobile app that we're launching, but if that's a small indie game studio that is 2 persons that have been working on it for the past 5 years,
yeah,
right, like Among Us or
Yeah.
whatever, um, uh, there is no money to be paid.
Yep. Yeah.
As in they can't afford that. So where does that leave them? And that's like the 1% don't need help.
Yeah.
Right? They can just sure, we'll hire Mandiant to solve our problems, right?
Yeah.
But the 99%, I'd say, can you like even sign a contract? Because minimum contract value is above, say, 10K
Yep.
for a lot of places.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard problem. We'll see where it actually goes to. I don't know if, especially in the States, I don't know if there's appetite for the public sector to get involved there. But I do know that like they actually, like the public sector does do penetration testing like on their assets. But again, they're getting private to come in and do that in a lot of cases. But there is, on the defense side of things, that there are stipulations and certain regulations that are in place, right? Like having known CVEs in a product nowadays is a no-no for any product that you're selling to to the defense contractors or to the defense department, right?
But how far down the supply chain, right?
Does that go? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, no, it's basically that. Like, how far down the supply chain does that go? And if it starts hitting like the 2-person software shop, that is a small business, or because this is an open source project that they are supporting.
Yeah.
Where does that go?
Yeah. Well, no, that's been the pushback that we've had, right? Like there was because they came out and they said, oh, you can't sell products to these government agencies if they have open CVEs in them, right? And that's been the pushback is, okay, well, what does that look like? Because does that mean that this 2-person shop has to then hire a security person to patch vulnerabilities in open source products because they happen to depend on Linux or something else, right, as an embedded system? It's just this, it's a huge snarl to actually figure out. But
I think the most hilarious one I saw was somebody sending a security questionnaire
yeah
to an open source project.
Yeah.
And go like,
Yep.
We use your open source project. Our lawyers demand that you fill in this security assessment questionnaire and return this to us within 48 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to happen on a project that hasn't, there's been no commit for 2 years, right? Like that's, yeah. Good.
And you go like, it's an open source project.
Yep.
Feel free to answer it yourself.
Yep.
And submit a pull request. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes. Sweet. All right, Daniel.
Yeah.
Well, I know we've been talking for a while, so we'll go ahead and call it for today. I appreciate you jumping on last minute. For those of you that are listening, Daniel filled in because Ken's been out sick, and so we still wanted to talk, especially about the Optus breach, obviously, because that's where we spent the majority of our time. But if you're ever in Melbourne, hit Daniel up, because it's great to go out and get some food and talk and drinks about security stuff.
And
hopefully
coffee.
And coffee. Yes, Melbourne specifically. Lots of Melbourne coffee. I need to get back down there just for that coffee fix. So yeah, but jump into our Slack channel if you've got further questions or discussions that you want on that. Appreciate all the responses, and Daniel, I appreciate the time. It's good to catch up.
Been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Any last minute thoughts before we call it? Stay secure. Good luck. Good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah. Monitor your credit, folks. Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.